The first president was George Washington. You can remember him because on the lawn in front of the White House is an enormous washing machine big enough to wash a ton of clothes. And wash a ton will remind you of George Washington. Next came John Adams. If you open the lid to the washing machine, inside, swirling around in all the soap and bubbles, there are a bunch of nuclear atoms. And atoms will remind you of John Adams. After Adams came Thomas Jefferson. Look who's cooking the atoms. It's not a chef who normally would be cooking. It's the chef's son. And chef's son reminds you of Thomas Jefferson. Next came James Madison. The chef's son looks down to see where all the heat is coming from that's allowing him to cook, and it's not from a coal or electricity. No, the source of the heat is a sun trapped under the grill, and that sun is mad. Mad sun sounds like James Madison. Then came James Monroe. The mad sun opens his mouth and out flows a boiling hot river. And in the river is a little rowboat being rowed by some money. And Money Row would remind you of James Monroe. Can you see what kind of money that is? It's a $5 bill. And that's a trick to help you remember that James Monroe was the 5th president. I'm going to teach you a little trick like this for every 5th president, and that'll help you remember their number. After Monroe came John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams, our 2nd president. The money rowing the boat is kind of stupid and not paying any attention to where he's going. And he bumps into a dam. A dam will remind you of John Quincy Adams. Then came Andrew Jackson. Flowing over the dam are a bunch of playing cards, and every single one of them is a jack. You've got the jack of clubs, the jack of hearts, the jack of spades, the jack of diamonds. And all those jacks will remind you of Andrew Jackson. After Jackson came Martin Van Buren. 4 of those jacks are having an identity crisis and think that they're carjacks, so they go to the corners of a van where the tires would normally be. The van has a bureau on top, and a van with a bureau on top, or Van Bureau, would remind you of Martin Van Buren. After Van Buren came William Henry Harrison. That van with the bureau on top now grows hair all over it, and a hairy van sounds like William Henry Harrison. Next came John Tyler. A lot of that hair is snipped off of the van and woven into a funky necktie, a very hairy necktie. And stuck to the tie is a fishing lure. And a tie with a lure on it, or tie lure, would remind you of John Tyler. Now, how old are boys when they start wearing a tie to church or school dances? We're going to say 10. 10 will remind you that John Tyler was the 10th president. Now, let's go back and review. On the lawn in front of the White House, there was a washing machine big enough to do what? Wash a ton. And wash a ton reminds you of George Washington. Then you open the lid to the washing machine, and swirling around in all the soap and bubbles are what? A bunch of nuclear atoms. That's right. Reminds you of John Adams. Then the atoms are being fried by not the chef, but by the chef's son. That reminds you of Thomas Jefferson. The chef's son looks down to see where all the heat's coming from, and it's coming from a mad sun. That's right, a mad sun. Mad sun reminds you of James Madison. The mad sun opens his mouth and outflows a boiling river. And in the river is a little rowboat being rowed by what? Money. And Money Row reminds you of James Monroe. What dollar bill was that?
$5 bill.
It was a 5, that's right. 5 will remind you that James Monroe was the 5th president. Right. And the money rowing a boat is kind of stupid and not paying attention. And he bumps into what? A dam. And a dam reminds you of John Quincy Adams. Then flowing over the dam are a bunch of what kind of cards? Jacks. Yes, jacks remind you of Andrew Jackson. Then 4 of the jacks have an identity crisis and go to the corners of what? It's a van with a bureau on top. And Van Bureau reminds you of Martin Van Buren. Then the van and the bureau sprout hair all over it, and Harry Van will remind you of William Henry Harrison. Some of the hair is snipped off of the van with the bureau and woven into a tie, and stuck to the tie is a lure, a fishing lure. Tie lure reminds you of John Tyler. And how old are boys before they start wearing ties to church and school dances?
10.
They're 10, right. That reminds you that John Tyler was the
10th president.
10th president. Very good.